On this first episode of The Witness Room, I am talking to my dear friend Mehran Seyed Emami. A few months ago, the world watched another war unfold. Headlines, maps, casualty counts. The story got told the way these stories always get told, in the language of states, strikes, and strategies. But underneath it all is a person, a family, a life. This conversation is about what it's like to live inside the headlines. Mehran is an Iranian-Canadian trauma-informed therapist and registered clinical counsel based in Vancouver. He is trained in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and he's currently running a practice called mind-body integration. Mehran is also the son of Dr. Ravan Seyed Emami, the Iranian-Canadian sociologist and environmentalist who died in Tehran's Evin prison in 2018, under circumstances his family has never accepted as suicide. Mehran was in his 20s when it happened. The grief of that loss and the long work of processing it lives within his work and his approach to life itself. I've known Mehran for a while now, so this is not an interview in the usual sense, but a conversation between two people who care deeply about each other and about the world around them. We are constantly trying to find language for something most of us carry without naming. We talk about his father, about what it feels like to grieve a country in real time. We talk about the body, the nervous system, and what healing actually asks of us. I hope by the end of this conversation you feel a little bit less alone in whatever you've been carrying. So I bring you my friend, Mehran.
Hello, brother Malek. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, brother.
Thank you for saying yes to this without knowing much about what this is, but I'm starting this series calling it The Witness Room. And the goal is to sit with incredible people like yourself and getting to dig deeper into our humanity and the parts of stories that usually get dismissed, and I think the noise kind of push it to the side. So we need the space to meet people where they're at and stop listening to the headlines and what's being told about them. So thank you for saying yes to it. And I'm curious about what's present to you in this moment. How's the weather inside?
Tuning in, from Vancouver, BC. The weather outside is chilly. It's a beautiful day as I'm looking outside. Inside, there's layers of not just the individual, but the collective, given what is happening, unfolding in Iran as we speak. I started this Persian psychedelic society called Ravan Nama, a phrase we coined for the word psychedelic in Farsi, which means Ravan means soul or psyche, Nama means to reveal or to make manifest. And so this was my way of essentially becoming a bridge between my home here in the West with Iranians back home, and 90% of our community, of our audience, so to speak, are Iranians in Iran who don't have access to internet as we speak. And so it has been challenging kind of getting my finger on the pulse of what is unfolding in the collective psyche in Iran at the moment. But given the conversations I have with people, there's a mixed bag. There's a joke that if you speak to 4 Iranians, you hear 5 different, stories or perspectives. And so you hear everything ranging from anticipation, trepidation, anxiousness, uncertainty, shock, confusion, doubt, anger, sadness, not knowing. A few months in, now we're entering the 3 month of, the US-Israeli attacks on Iran. And one line I heard from someone I spoke to was that we're very tired. We're tired. We're tired of the accumulation of the oppression, both from within and without, from the outside and inside, by our own regime, but also these external regimes that some people are seeing, whether correct or not, as a kind of savior, as a humanitarian aid, as a way to help rescue them from what is occurring. And there are others who are resiliently, creatively, powerfully, incredibly, beautifully creating from a deep, deep, deep place of silence and oppression and suffering, pain. So that has been incredibly inspiring for me to witness, to see. On the flip side, I see Iranians, the Iranian diaspora outside of Iran, and what I witness is a lot of infighting, a lot of polarization, a lot of division, a lot of othering, a lot of you're either with me or against me, this us versus them narrative that has been embedded, programmed in a way in the minds and psyche of the Iranians outside of Iran, who see the Iranians, many of them, as a kind of victim, as someone who does not have agency or choice or dominion or power in the face of such brutal circumstance. I guess it's important for me to name, not that I have to, but I think it's important to, the protests in January, so about 5 months ago, where up to, and I don't know the exact number, and even one is too many, but tens of thousands of people were massacred, were killed on the streets of not just Tehran, but across Iran. And this was the final straw, that essentially sent people into rage and that this is enough, this cannot go on, this cannot continue. And so another line I heard from another person was, when you're deep down in the dark well, you do not argue over the color of the rope that is being thrown to save you. And I need to honor that. I need to hear that. I may not agree with that, but I have to deeply emotionally, from a trauma perspective, as someone who works with people who've endured trauma throughout their lives, where is that pain coming from? And so how do I hold both? To both hold the agency of the powerful Iranian fighting for freedom, let's call it, or peace, or just a regular, normal, basic humanitarian life, or while also respecting, honoring, welcoming those who are just fucking exhausted and they're like, we've had enough. And what do we do from here? Needing certainty, needing an answer, needing a solution. And that void, unfortunately, now filled by the external savior, whatever you want to call it, but now manifested in a intervention, in a rescuer, in a savior, in a war with bombs and violence. And a part of me is like, do you really think that's the way? Like, is our millennia old history culminating in now being saved by Trump? And this is a half joking way of the way some people are referencing Netanyahu as Uncle Bibi is going to save us, you know? And when I hear that, my mind just goes into a tailspin. Like, I wonder, like, how do I even sit with that, be with that? Are people not aware of history? Are they not aware of geopolitics 101? Are they not aware of the patterns? Those who are, what is that line? Those who don't learn from history are deemed to repeat it, you know? Or are we somehow different? There's this kind of implicit pride, which I hear and honor among Iranians, that somehow we're different from other people or other countries and that our fate and destiny will somehow be different. Are you sure about that? You know, so any kind of line of certainty or shortness, I would rather welcome with a little bit of unsureness or not knowing or welcoming uncertainty or curiosity or other ways of being or perspective, which has been the challenge for me personally, to constantly be with my own uncertainty, doubt, hope, and hopelessness, all of it. And so, Malek, I apologize for going on a long-winded way of answering your question.
Don't apologize. I think it's present and it's clearly something that is happening now. So it needs to be named as we set up the stage. I love how every time we talk, there isn't a surface level conversation. We always go to the deep end right away. And I love that. And that's why I thought you'll be great first person to sit with and talk to about this. I have a lot to say to that. And, you know, my opinion on it and my stand on it is, I love the phrase that I read that says, an egg cracked from the outside mean end of life, and an egg cracked from the inside means the beginning of life. And I still stand on that perspective, especially when it comes to change in countries. And there shouldn't be that party that comes in and it's like, we're going to bring you freedom. People have the wisdom and the knowledge to know how to navigate, and they are navigating. They were trying to navigate that, except it gets hijacked and taken away from people, that agency you talk about. Before we dive more into that, I would love for you to kind of speak a little bit about your background. Like you mentioned you're a therapist, so would like to understand more of what led you to the field you're in, and how do you sit and navigate these realities of you yourself dealing with and holding that space for someone else to speak their truth as well.
So perhaps a pin that we can drop can be late 2017, when I had the privilege of working with ayahuasca in Peru, deep in the Amazon. And I had one of the most blissful, nostalgic, because it felt like returning home. It was a deep remembering, you know, for someone who grew up in the US and then went back to Iran and then made his way back to Canada. And then life and work took me again to Iran, to Dubai, to China, to Hong Kong, and, you know, other East Asian countries. And the experience in 2017 reminded me of the slight cliche that when I say it, you know, that home is within, people may kind of, oh, that's cute, you know, but what does it really mean? And I got to really experience that at the experiential level, at the cellular level, you know, deep in my bones, you know, that home is just a state of being, not even a state of mind, a state of being. And in that experience, like everything just kind of made sense, you know, even at the, you know, at the level of the psyche and the mind, because the body was finally able to recognize and remember and embody. But little did I know that that experience was preparing me for what was to come next, which was a few months later, in early 2018, while I was away. I was in China at the time. And I got the news that my father had been arrested. My father's an incredible, powerful being, an academic, an environmentalist, someone who also studied in the West, 2 masters and a PhD. While I was growing up in Oregon, that's where he was studying and teaching, and eventually deciding to go back to Iran. He didn't want us to become American. We easily could have applied for a green card or just stayed in Iran, but he wanted us to go back to connect to our roots, to be around, our culture and our lands and, our traditions in our communities. And so for him, the way he was a bridge was to teach students in many ways. So one of the ways was in university as an academic, and for 3 decades he was quite the mentor to many in the young generation who are coming from relatively conventional or traditional or without attributing the slightest negative sense to it, but quite religious, upbringing and backgrounds in Iran. My family was always quite secular, and we grew up. I didn't grow up, in the traditional sense, with religion being a key or major part of my life. As I mentioned, growing up in the US and then coming to Iran, and quite a bit of confusion when I would see people chanting death to America or like having to learn how to pray or Islamic studies. To be honest, it didn't really quite land for me or make sense to me. And I was trying to get kind of understand like what is going on. It almost felt like I went from color to monochrome or black and white, the shades of gray, where I was in this new environment, new space, trying to find a way to assimilate and find identity, find meaning, find like, who am I in the midst of all of this? This is like growing up in Iran. Fast forward again to my father. So teaching for 3 decades at this university, and bringing together people from different background, ideology, perspective, ways of being, ways of living together, to try to find commonality, common ground, unity, and ways of being and living and understanding. He taught sociology, political science, so things that are, really understanding people. Another way he was quite impactful was through the environmental work that he did, where in 2008 they started an NGO where one of their goals was to help not rescue, because I don't think we can really rescue an endangered species or animal, but rather hope for repopulating the Asiatic cheetah, this beautiful, rare, endangered cat that lives in Iran, has lived in those lands for many, many, many years. And the numbers have gone down to the point where there's only less than 50 left in the world. And they're all in Iran, in incredibly arid, remote, dry lands, essentially trying to survive. And so in his mission to help this animal, they would set up camera traps, to help monitor, like any other wildlife conservation NGO, where they live and how to help them, provide anything they can to help them repopulate. And in the fearful, paranoid minds of the Iranian regime, they assumed that they must be spies, spying on missile activities. Iran is known to have these kind of underground missile cities, as some people might call them, which is not new, by the way. I can trace back at least as far back as 2015, when it's been reported and shared, and even bragged about, because look at us, that this is how we operate, not just above ground, but below the ground. But ultimately, they suspected that how can someone go out of their ways to spend so much time, energy, effort to try to help an animal? Like, for some people, that just doesn't make any sense, to someone who may potentially, for example, consider dogs as haram, like, for example. And so in those efforts, they were arrested, my father with 8 other colleagues, and within 2 weeks in jail, where we were kind of in shock, not knowing even how to react, how to act, what to say, whether to speak up, whether to stay silent. And we chose to stay silent during those 2 weeks, not to rattle the cage, so to speak, or make it worse than what it was. And my father's innocent, and nothing can ever happen to him, of course. That was the way of thinking at the time.
Where were you at the time?
I was in China, essentially for work. My work took me there, and so I would just follow. And my mom insisted that we not return to Iran because it might be dangerous and it might not be safe. And so, my brother was in New York. I was in China, and we decided to stay outside until we got the news that essentially he died in Evin prison, which is notorious for the kind of things you don't want to hear or don't want to see or don't want to imagine. I won't go into that, but I did go into that in an ayahuasca experience that I might share a bit later with you. But essentially, we got the news that he had died, and that he had died by suicide. And so imagine all of that information through a phone call, and within seconds, my body just going into whoop, like shut down. And so essentially, for the past 8-9 years, for me, it's been a process of breathing life back into a dead body, in a way, a body that disconnected, that had no choice but to protect itself, to just find ways to, okay, like now you're the man of the house, you're the father, you're the responsible one. In our culture, they say you need to be strong, when someone passes, someone dies, when something happens. So I immediately get the next flight, go back to Iran. I remember one time only I cried, and that was like when I pulled a blanket over my head. So even like the flight service staff wouldn't see me, where I was almost like not ashamed per se, but kind of, I didn't want anyone to see me in my emotion. And so I pulled a blanket over my head, cried a few tears only. And then I pull yourself together, got to Iran, my mother in shambles, and everyone in shock around us, not realizing like how quickly this all happened, where overnight, my life essentially shifted, changed. And so then began like a month of chaos where we had to recover his body, to arrange a burial, still under a kind of supervision by security apparatus forces, where they wanted us to just be quiet and not say anything and shut up and just get it over with, kind of thing. And yet still hundreds of people, because so many people knew him, showed up, at the ceremony, that we offered in the mountains of near Tehran, where we had a place where my dad loved and where I'm sure he would have loved to be left. And so a month later, after he died, we decided that there's no way to stay in Iran, just because, how could I go back to my same job? And everyone knew about what had happened, our story. And the only thing that made sense at the time was to come back to Canada, where luckily we had a passport. And at the airport, they held my mom audaciously. This is another way to try to keep us quiet, to keep our family quiet. And they held her at the airport. My mom insisted, you and your brother, our 3 dogs and 9 suitcases, you guys, can travel. And then don't worry, I'll come. And that was a very obviously hard choice to make, at that time, kind of as the plane was about to leave, do we stay or do we go? And she was like, go, and, I'll be okay. It took us 1.5 years, for her to leave Iran, which was, as you can imagine, like a very painful time. Gabor Mate, a specialist in addiction and trauma who lives here in Vancouver, he heard about our story. He invited us into his home, introduced us to his family, me and my brother Ram, and so what do you want to do next? And Ram had met him just a month prior in Costa Rica at a ayahuasca retreat, because remember, I had also experienced ayahuasca a few months prior to that. And I immediately booked like a 5-star retreat for my brother because he was struggling and he was like dealing with some addiction issues. And I thought at the time, I wouldn't do this now, but I can offer this as a gift to help him and help him break out of these cycles and help him get better. That was still the caretaker in me, and he's the older brother. And I felt this role or responsibility that I should somehow, if he's suffering, that's too much for me. And so I need to do something about it. And this was one way to do something about it. And anyways, they met in Costa Rica, became quite close. My brother is like an incredibly social, friendly, everyone loves him the moment they see him. And so they connected, bonded. And so Gabor heard about our story when this happened. And that's why he invited us into his home and then asked, what do you want to do next? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. And he was like, do you know about CIS, California Institute of Integral Studies, a school in the US in the Bay Area that is training helpers, so physicians, psychiatrists, social workers, nurses, anyone in the helping profession, so to speak, how to become psychedelic assisted therapists, to work primarily with MDMA, but it can be really other synthetic or even potentially medicines like mushrooms. And so
before we go into that, I want to come back to it. First, thank you for sharing that. And I am genuinely curious about to lose your father and to try to go out and find and build whatever you can build from kind of the ash of consciousness that get to happen when you lose a parent that way. But then your mother gets stuck in the airport, and I'm curious about what it felt like for you to be on the plane, to move through grief and also that kind of confusion and also uncertainty that comes with, okay, what's going to happen now? Am I going to see my mother? I don't know what kind of thought process that crossed your mind, but if you are willing, I'm genuinely curious about that. And how did you navigate that in that moment?
To be honest, Malek, I don't remember. That is the most genuine answer I can give you, because I think I was in a fight or flight, hypervigilant, solution-oriented, fixing mode where imagine I'm sitting in a class. So I decided to go to CIS, and imagine for my master's program, I'm sitting in class and then I get a call from Berlin from my brother who's about to commit suicide. And so what could someone in that moment do in himself? A mother in Iran, I'm in San Francisco, my brother in Berlin about to kill himself. I don't mean this to sound audacious or make it, romantic or, oh, look at me, poor me. No, I was just saying that there was no chance to really be with, or at least I thought there wasn't any chance to be with anything that was occurring, happening, unfolding within me. I was just in shock. I was disconnected. I was just kind of in the prefrontal cortex, executive order, CEO mind, how do we just function day to day? And there are interviews, Malek, from me, as you might have noticed today as well, where sometimes the experience does not match the facial expression. So I might be smiling almost as a way to hide the pain. So there are interviews where we're with Christiane Amanpour on CNN. This is just a few weeks after all of this has happened, and we've landed in Canada first. We traveled to New York, and we decided to speak up, to share our story. If you just Google my name, it's like all over the news. one interview in particular is with Christian Amanpour, where I looked very put together and but I was also like, there was a smile on my face. But wait a minute, like this story is quite heavy and dark and painful and emotional and layered and nuanced and complex. Like, why the fuck are you smiling? And so I don't know how to explain it. I'm just saying that that kind of almost portrays where I was at the time, where I just really had to how we prepare ourselves to look good on camera, before we go on an interview. It was that kind of mode. And so I hope that kind of answers your question. But my brother, who's incredibly more sensitive, his way of dealing with it was through addiction, for example, or needing to numb the pain, cope with the pain. The way I would cope with pain might have been to become intellectual or to use my mind, or now studying books about trauma and psychology. Or not avoidance per se, but just being on top of shit, just kind of being really functional, being a good boy, being strong, which for me at the time, strength meant, just keeping your shit together.
Just putting it to the side, I think I resonate with that. Most of the heavy trauma, I would speak about it and make joke about it, or when it show up, it just put it to the side, and my role is to survive kind of attitude. I don't have time to feel this. Let me just get out of this that I'm in. So to me, it makes perfect sense because I do the same. So now you did that, you're trying to advocate to help save your mom in many different ways. What happened next? And I have a feeling that when you're talking about psychedelic, that was the moment when I'll speak to myself that to me, when I did my first psychedelic is when I actually got to feel all the things I avoided. But it's also in that abstract way of like, okay, well, these things happen. Now the floodgate is open. What do I do with these feelings? So walk me through the process of helping get your mom, save your mom. And then at what point did you get to actually, okay, I'm forced to process this? Was it through that journey of medicine?
I think the first thing I had to reconcile was dissolving the illusion that I had any control over the situation. So my mother being held by the Iranian government, the Iranian regime that has revoked her passport, and good luck trying to get her back. Perhaps I was also in the naivety that once, we share our story on the news and across Western media, that everyone is going to rally behind us and fight for our freedom and for my mother. And literally, she had calls from the foreign minister of Canada, who's now the vice president, I believe, Chrystia Freeland, who called her. And, just Justin Trudeau posted about my mother. And, this is like how high up, I suppose, it went in the Canadian government, and a lot of nice gestures, but ultimately none of it really mattered, or the Iranian regime didn't really care until they chose that she could leave. I, or even the institutions or governments or Europeans or anyone else, didn't really have any say in the matter. So I would say that I had to go through a process of recognizing, realizing, getting past the naivety of thinking that, my mom was going to be okay next week. As I mentioned, it took about 18 months before she was finally released and able to come and join us. She wasn't in prison. She was at home being monitored from time to time, but ultimately was able to join us in Canada, I believe in October of 2019. I might have those dates wrong, but essentially, the psychedelic journeys, I'm trying to remember at the time. I can give you an example of an experience with two experienced facilitators, and I think this was also in 2019, where they offered a medicine called 5-MeO-DMT, which is the smoked venom of the Sonoran or Colorado River toad. which is a very, very, very potent psychedelic for those who might have heard about it or tried it. You might have seen it on Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, the series on Vice that talks about psychedelics. But ultimately, if you see it even in a documentary or on video, you might see the person gone for at least 15 to 30 minutes. Like they are blasted off. So it's enough to drop like an elephant, And so I was lying down and they offered me this medicine. I doubt that the medicine had any issue, or I doubt that the facilitators didn't know what they were doing, but they offered me 3 doses of this medicine and quote unquote, nothing happened. And they offered like a low dose, a medium dose, a high dose. I can share in milligrams. People might be familiar, some with it, but high doses. And nothing happened. And so the message at the time, in the moment, for me was a bit of frustration, disappointment, upsetness, which is something, not nothing. But ultimately, I wondered, like, why did I not blast off and go to these places that I've heard about or seen on documentaries or read about, 5-MeO DMT? It was only later that I got to realize that I was already out of body. I was already in a state of dissociation, in a state of, hyper arousal, meaning that very little to no regulation. It's almost like, imagine a car and you have your feet on both the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. So you're not moving, but you're using up a lot of energy, And it's like that state that I was trying to add psychedelics to. And the psychedelics were telling me, you're just supposed to come back to the body, not supposed to blast off. And so the message was this momentary, quite relaxing, quite calm, like maybe 30 minutes to an hour of just kind of lying down and being with the body. And again, there wasn't any big, major somatic release or anything like that. But it was only through a series of trials and errors, trials and tribulations, working with different practitioners, different medicines, that ultimately, in the years that followed, I got to realize that the medicines that worked best for my nervous system were actually MDMA and ketamine. One may be surprised because obviously the amount of respect and reverence we have for the plant medicines like ayahuasca, like mushrooms. But I tried like a higher dose of mushrooms and the same happened. It just felt overwhelming to my system and not much was able to be processed. But it was with MDMA and ketamine that I was able to finally land and just for a moment kind of open a window into the feeling body, the sensation body, like the amalgamation of feelings, kind of the multiplicity of feelings, and be with it all without needing to numb, run away, escape, reject, oppress, repress, project, fix, all the things we tend to do on a day-to-day basis, And that was when finally I was able to begin to breathe. And this was probably, I'm trying to remember, but I'm guessing maybe 2020, 2021, around that time, that it was only starting to enter, kind of crack open the egg to let some light come in and finally the body to breathe again.
I'm curious about how was that to you? How did you perceive it and process it that, well, finally I'm in a place that past the threshold of like just operating from survival to this moment of like, oh, okay, I can tend to these parts that need some remedies and taking care and stopping the bleeding and kind of healing the self, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It was a process mostly somatic, mostly quiet, mostly peaceful, mostly subtle, where these parts very gently, very softly, very slowly began to reveal themselves, to be seen, to be acknowledged. Perhaps the anger initially, like there was this bout of this sudden burst of like a yell, a scream, a cry, a yawn, a tear. Like I noticed, I couldn't even really connect the emotion, but I just noticed under my eye mask, like one tear came down. So probably sadness. I don't even know how to describe grief or how grief was processed, and whether, to be honest with you, Malek, even to this day, whether it has been fully processed, so to speak. I think it's still alive in me even now as we speak. And it's almost like grief is one of those enigmas that the more you study, the more you learn about, the more there is, and it's like this ongoing process, I suppose. There was a part of me that just wanted to heal and get it over with, or just put it behind me, or like and get better and move on. But it was just like cycles where I would like it would accumulate and culminate in like a back pain, a shutdown, a dissociation, or whatever it was. And then every 6 months, I would have another journey just to once again reveal a new layer somatically again, and to be with it, sit with it, breathe through it, and kind of continue. And this happened for a couple of years, to be honest, where it wasn't like a sudden shift, but rather each time revealed just enough capacity to be with the stuff of life momentarily before I kind of went back in. Maybe in hindsight, this was due to not integrating the experience enough, or not having enough of a support system. Or when I would go to a therapist and tell my story, like they would cry.
Yeah.
Because, not many people kind of get us, both of us, right? Like how many people can we truly share like our story with? I know it's a story, but it has layers. It's important. It's nuanced. It's complex. It's like from a cultural perspective, from a biopsychosocial, spiritual perspective, like how many people can truly see us? And that's where healing lies ultimately. I would imagine between I, me and me, but an incredible amount of healing can happen relationally, in the presence of another, either one-on-one or in a group setting that I imagine you've had many experiences with.
Yeah.
So again, I went in a little bit of a roundabout way of trying to answer your question, but I hope that answers it a
That
little
was
bit.
perfect. There isn't a wrong answer. I think I'm genuinely just fascinated by how people process and think through different parts of their journey. And I think your journey is powerful, and also the way you paved the path for yourself in it is really admirable. And I do want to kind of now go back to the point of like, you met Dr. Gapor, and now you're thinking about what is next for you. Can you walk me through that now? Like, was that after you already worked and sat with medicine that you knew there's a calling for you in a different way, and you were tending to answer that call? Was it something that you discovered as you were walking that path?
The decision to go to CIS was a blessing to have Gabor Mate come into my field, my path, in combination with probably my dad from up above, or within, guiding me through like an invisible hand that's almost like nudging me in this direction that I ultimately ended up taking. From the level of the mind and psyche, like myself, it was actually quite selfish, because to not be hard on myself, but what I mean by that is that it was initially going to school and studying with Gabor Mate to learn about how the fuck am I going to get better or out of this, or even process this, or even begin to look at it. And it was so, I was trying to get ahead of myself to try to solve it with the mind and the intellect, and trying to understand theory and concept, and go to every training and workshop you can imagine, and studying experiential practices from holotropic breath work to somatic therapy, compassionate inquiry with Gabor, and then the studies at CIS, which can get quite heady. Like, it is a school that brings together the East and West, let's call it, mindfulness and yoga, and together with more Western paradigms of Freudian, Jungian, Maslow psychology. And so at the time, it was just to figure out kind of how to process individually what has occurred, what has happened, and why has this happened to me. So it's still very much in the kind of individual. It's not about service or, I'm sorry to say, fuck everyone else. Like, how am I going to deal with myself? And obviously I'm dealing with my brother and mother, and all of that is incredibly important. But a part of me was just like, I need to get better so I can take care of my brother and mother. I mean, the reasoning was that, but ultimately it was, how to deal with what is occurring inside of myself. But eventually it began to become clear, either with or without psychedelic journeys, that maybe perhaps the reason you went through this was to be able to learn about the reality of suffering, the truth of suffering, and that perhaps just like your father, you are meant to be a bridge, and that perhaps there is no other way to get out of this, even if that is a way to look at it, than service, than to become, someone who can help others who've gone through similar or painful experiences of grief and loss and trauma, which our people have, for generations. And so I think that became quite evident, became more and more strong as the days went by, of then deciding in 2021, 2022 to begin working with not just Iranians, but really anyone. And realizing that that was just an extension of who I was already. It wasn't like I need to put on a hat or put on a role or have a fancy degree in order to prove my worth or have something to say or offer, but rather it was just, the opposite, that I had to crunch all of this information to eliminate some of the levels of self-doubt, and that who are you to have anything to say or offer to anyone? So kind of, dissolve that voice, the inner critic, judge, but ultimately recognizing that, so maybe I'm here just to sit with, not do anything, not fix, not intervene, not project, not try to rescue them, save them, get in the way, but just be, just listen. And imagine that's your role. Just for now, perhaps for the rest of your life, just be and listen. And in that being and listening, maybe, with the help of a medicine, in this case, MDMA, something might shift, something might change, occur in them. When I have full trust in their autonomy, in their agency, in their nervous system, in their ways of being, in their ways of processing, like you noted, in their ways of storifying, creating narratives, whatever it might be. And almost like Ram Dass uses this example, witnessing like a butterfly that is moving quite chaotically and trying to like almost entrance you, to take you along the ride, of their really deep victim story, that we all have. And we are just witnessing, hearing, listening. I hear you. I honor you. Not looking away, not avoiding. I have my eyes closed, but eye to eye, soul to soul, witnessing someone. Finally, the butterfly, after like 10 minutes, 10 hours, sits. And in that moment, when I am breathing and they are breathing, that's when something happens. Something, what is it? A shift, a click, an aha moment, a healing, whatever we want to call it, a reconciliation, a remembering, a reconnection, and it's in that moment where two people meet, the right place, right time, with the right person, where healing manifests, it's like a symphony, it's a synergy, it's a dance is a good word, a dance of two souls, a dance of, a song, it's just incredible. It's a gift to be witnessing someone as the butterfly dances.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. There's so many things that come to my mind as you share that. Part of it is like, how did your mom react to you, like psychedelic and all of that? I just know there's certain stigma, or even not really knowing much about it. So what was that conversation like? It's like, I'm going to go this road, I'm going to walk this path. how did you have that conversation?
I always joke with my mom, if you're trying to explain what I do to a friend, how would you define me? How would you say that? How would you share that? And she's like, my son, went to school, he has a master's, or he's a doctor. I don't know, something, like to make it look good. Or because she is incredibly wise. She's powerful. Don't get me wrong. Like my mom is a powerhouse. Like we call it Shirzan, which means like lioness or lion woman in Farsi. Shirzan. Shir means lion. Zan means woman. But she hasn't experienced psychedelics. And so a part of me, like, or other people might ask, or when I witness others who've had a chance to have experiences with their families, like there is a bit of envy or jealousy, but I recognize that perhaps in this lifetime, in this body, in this karmic, path that my mom is on, like psychedelics are not a part of it. Maybe for her, it's gardening or, spending time in this beautiful nature around Vancouver, which literally today, like that's what she's doing with our dogs. Or the way she communicates with my dad, or she sees dreams, or whatever it might be. And so she doesn't fully know what I do, and nor do I insist on having to explain it to her. She just might see me sharing a photo of one of the retreats that I've offered, or a group 10, 15, 20 Iranians, having a journey, lying down, eye mask on, beautiful space setting in nature, and I'm sure she's proud. This sounds a bit, I'm sheepishly sharing this, but she sometimes says, you know what, you were happier when you were doing business and making money and all of that, like she, from a safety, stability, security, sustainability perspective, like she sees my old life as having been the best time of my life, and or when I was most stable, secure, confident. And now she sees me doing this work where sometimes, there might be one or two more layers under my eyes, or a bit of tiredness or exhaustion, a bit of fatigue. Not because I take on anything, I try not to, but ultimately, inevitably, we do be all the time with people who are sharing deep stories of trauma and suffering. I mean, that's why people are drawn to us in many ways. I wish, and it does happen sometimes, where people would come to us to dance and celebrate and just, and all of it can weave together. So I don't mean to even discern or between the two in that way. But ultimately, she sees that, not worry, but she wants what's best for me, and what is what truly makes me happy. There's like a few tiny parts in me. I'm wondering how to phrase this, that I'm trying really hard, or I was trying really hard, to fill the shoes of my father. And so is that deeply, truly, authentically me? Or is that me trying to be like my father who impacted so many? You know what I mean? It's like, and I can relate this to the second one, which was like an imposter syndrome, like a part of me that is like, this isn't really you at times. Like you're playing a part, you're playing a role, you're faking it, and that part can show up sometimes in like, is this truly, deeply, authentically my path? Or am I trying to squeeze myself into what is good, what is noble, be a do-gooder? Ram Dass jokes about this. A lot of people try to do good, and they become an activist or start an NGO or, go to the front of the protest and oftentimes become exhausted or go into burnout or compassion fatigue or break down or don't know how to take care of themselves. And so some of that does apply to me. I'm still at times caught up in this predicament of, am I truly practicing what I preach? Do I embody what I speak? Do I take care of myself as much as I take care of others? Do I honor my needs as much as I see and honor yours? I am in that dance still. Again, another way to answer your question around how my mom sees me and perhaps how I see myself.
Yeah, part of that resonate in the way of like, there's moment of like, am I doing this for myself? Is the good I'm doing, is it for myself? Is it for this higher ideals that one have about what a person should do. But I think to me, what I come back to a lot of time is it fulfilling me? Is it something that I feel great doing, even though it exhausts me at times? And a lot of time is yes. Psychedelic changed my life in that way of I had that stable job, that stable life, that everything is moving the way it should be, at least on paper. Had house, white fence, green grass, all the way we picture what life should be or what we are told what life should be. But then I wasn't fulfilling that void in my soul and my heart that it once I started walking this path, it felt like, yes, this is what life is. And it felt like it's almost you get high on it sometime too. You're like, this is what I should be doing. This is I feel great. And prior to like organizing a ceremony, it feels exhausting and a lot. But once you're there, once it's done, you're like, wow, that just happened. And that reward is, there's nothing that can replace it. So it is hard sometimes to articulate that to people, including like friends and family. I had ceremony with my brothers when they came to visit for the first time after 13 years of not seeing each other. And prior to that, I talked to them about this. There's just nothing to grasp in their mind. They never had alcohol or any kind of mind altering thing. So there's nothing that they would kind of relate to until they did that ceremony. And there was no words to be spoken. And they're like, yeah, it makes sense that you're doing this and you should be doing this. But until that moment happened, there's nothing to reference in their mind. And I had that same thing with my mom, explaining to her my work in legalization of cannabis and my work inside that psychedelic. And she doesn't know what any of these are. And to her answer was like, I don't understand it, but as long as you're helping people and you're doing good, continue doing it. And that was like, yeah, that's as sweet as I could have imagined that conversation to go.
Yeah, and I even as you shared that, it's almost like both our mothers, perhaps from the soul like level, if I may say, are like kind of cheering us on. You know what I mean? Like they know, but they also don't know. It's almost as if they know, but they also don't know. You know what I mean? Like there's such a deeper, motherly, intuitive, instinctual, powerful feeling of maybe if the mind and psyche doesn't understand, but I would imagine and hope for the soul to get why, you know, my son is doing what he's doing, even if it's at time difficult and challenging.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a felt thing. We don't think much about it, but the idea that our moms and parents in general got to see us in all of our phases, got to experience our energy in all of our chapters of life. So they get to sense that energy, that presence that you show up with, even though they may not understand what you're doing, but in ways they understand more of you than many people will, because they know what that energy is like, what that presence feel like. And it is really incredible thing. And it took me a while to share that with my mom. And once I did it, the weight of it kind of dissolved and faded away, because I genuinely got into the field for the reason of wanting to do what I think I needed myself, and for people like me to experience psychedelic in the way that is safe and contained in the way I needed at times. So it was very simple way to share that with her.
And I just wanted to speak to your power and the work that you do, Malek. From what I've heard, the beautiful containers you create, the incredibly powerful cultural experience you create to be able to meet people, as we just talked about, across layers or levels. That doesn't really exist so much these days. How often do people see someone who is a mirror to them or their experience? And so just wanted to salute you and just really honor you, brother, for the work you do.
I appreciate that, and it means a lot coming from you, and hopefully we share one of those spaces sometime soon. You kind of touched on it in a different way, but I'm curious, like, what does your father's legacy ask of you today, where you are and who you are?
You know, what came up for me in this moment is that I'm about to have an experience with Wachuma, which is another name for San Pedro, the mescaline-containing cactus. And it's my first time experience this medicine. And perhaps in contrast to Mother Ayahuasca, Grandmother Ayahuasca, who may, for some, have more of a feminine presence, you know, this medicine can have more of a masculine presence. And as you said that, it's almost like I'm planting the seed in real time as I'm about to have this experience in 2 weeks to speak to my father, to kind of have a check-in, you know, get a few notes. Mm-hmm. Am I doing okay? Am I on the right path? Or am I completely off the beaten, you know, path? And so, to be honest, the way I relate and interact with my dad is often through nature. It comes in very, very soft and subtle ways. It's not very obvious, or like I just suddenly have a dream. There was only once in 2019, quite some time ago, when I had an overwhelming, you know, ayahuasca experience, but I was able to see, or at least everyone in the group said that we felt your dad's energy. Like, that's how powerful of a being, you know, I suppose he is. And yet, I think for the first couple of years, or even until recently, the little kid in me that missed his dad, that was so angry about the injustice that had occurred, and that was still holding on to him in physical form, has not been able to fully appreciate, acknowledge, reconcile the fact that he has left the body and is now in another form. You know what I mean? So I'm still kind of in this in-between space of letting go of who he was and kind of appreciating, acknowledging what he is. And that is like a living spirit, which I imagine, if I had to guess, I can't tell you with certainty, but he's probably speaking through me as I speak to you right now. And kind of like you said, in those deep, beautiful, poignant moments of a ceremony when me and you are sitting next to someone holding their hand as they're processing something incredibly deeply, it's almost like, you know, I am with him, or, you know, he's there to guide me, support me, be with me, and almost say, like, I'm proud of you, you know, but I don't know if that's true, or if it's like a part of me that wants to believe that's true. And so
I choose to believe it's true.
Yeah. So going back to Wachuma, like, this is what I perhaps, without creating expectation, but what my intention is to connect with him in different ways.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear what that's like for you, because you resonate with MDMA, and I think in ways Washuma is very close. It's different, but it is kind of like that open your heart and be present kind of medicine, at least to me. So I wanna hear how that goes for you and how you navigate it. I think it will be beautiful either way, whatever path. It's funny, ironic. I think to me, a lot of time I put things in my head. You probably experienced this. You're like, maybe I'll go this path when I go to the ceremony. And I never, ever go the way I was thinking. It's like, well, we're not going there. We're going this way. And you're like, but I want that. And you're like, no. So I don't know if that happens to you in your own journeys too.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And or it almost becomes like trivial, some of the things that have been on our minds or bothering us perhaps, or not, that we think we need to explore, or challenges or whatever may arise might sound or appear or be perceived as more superficial rather than what truly matters, So that does happen often for me. I do get caught up in sometimes the more silly, mundane. Who cares, man? Like, it just comes up and just kind of like pops away. Like,
Yeah.
let me say this, very funny example. I invite 100 people to my home. Like, I love hosting people and I love community gatherings. And like, one person doesn't show up. 99 people show up and have a really good time. And they even message me to say, Mehran, that was incredible. Thank you for this gathering. One person doesn't show up and my mind goes to like, what happened? What did I do? Why are they upset? Let me go and have a conversation with them, or try to not fix it, but, understand more about it, or use that as a way to like, Mehran, like, you're good, but you're not perfect, a little bit of a smack in the face, a little bit of the being hard on myself, and I'm surprised, like, when that part shows up and I'm like, seriously? And that extends to like, how people perceive me, how people see me, how they might judge me, how they might value me, how they may judge me, and all these things. And I'm like, really? Does that really bother you? Because I can give you a really nice, like, Ram Dass version of how, if you're a soul, then nothing will affect you. But, I'm like, no, this shit like bothers me, and so I'm still kind of reconciling between this very silly monkey that I am, and also, I imagine, the soul that I am.
As Iran now coming to the headlines and everyone's talking about Iran war, all of this, and the demonization. And I think we see it in every kind of struggle that comes to the surface, is people either victim or threat, and there is nothing in between. And for a culture that is as ancient as Iran, we are so stuck on these smaller, and to me, it's not relevant parts of the story. I would love to hear your thoughts on what's Iran to you, and how would you speak about Iran and being Iranian?
Comes to mind, and our cultures are very similar in this way, but what are the most beautiful attributes and qualities of the Persian or Iranian or Arabic culture? That we love gathering around food.
That was the first thing I thought of.
Exactly. Sofre, sit on the ground, truly meet each other, see each other, tell stories, share stories, which is an incredibly big part of our history, our culture, ancient history, by the way. Like, what is an older tradition than telling stories around the fire without sounding poetic, but where around the fire, also perhaps naming, and I don't know how true this is to our own ancient, let's say, Zoroastrian culture, I would imagine, where fire is sacred, but let me, for example, quote or name or reference, indigenous cultures where if one person among the tribe is wounded, then they are healing this collectively. They are hearing it collectively. They recognize that for one, it means for everyone. It recognizes if one of us is fragmented, this is affecting the whole. And it means that if we heal the whole, then the person who's fragmented can return home. And so what is a way of gathering around food, gathering around fire, being in presence to each other, to recognize that we're all in this dance together, to hopefully focus on what bonds us, brings us closer to each other, and what unifies us in those shared qualities that I just named, in our poetry, in our tradition, in our rugs, in our weaving, in our music, in our sound, in our medicines, ancient technologies, whatever it might be. Like as you do, we have, traditions around breath, ceremonies around breath. We have Sufism, we have mysticism, we have so many traditions that are there to help us remember. And so how do we tap into not this modern malaise of the hyper-individual mind that has been hijacked by the programming of othering, which unfortunately AI algorithms tend to amplify, that the feed that I see is only reinforcing the bubble that I think I'm in, which is fomenting more violence, more judgment, more hatred, more othering. When did I forget that I'm part of nature? When did I forget that I was, disconnected from my own people? When did I forget? Was it when I immigrated? Was it when I lost a family member? Was it when a member of my family got killed by this regime? Where did it originate? And to hopefully, I hope, as difficult and uncomfortable as it may be, but stepping out of the comfortable, familiar known into the uncomfortable, unfamiliar unknown. So stepping away from the comfortable, familiar known into the uncomfortable, unfamiliar unknown. So rather than needing certainty, needing to know, needing to get caught in the trap of righteousness and being right, Ram Dass says, is it possible to practice kindness or practice being kind instead of being right? Is that possible? Do we really insist? Do I need to double down? Do I need to justify and defend why I am right and you are wrong? Why I am good and you are bad? Why our side is good and your side is bad? We have to learn to get along. We have to learn that Islam has a big part of our history, whether you like it or not. You have to understand that this government and regime still has support, and we can't just automatically, magically, magic wand, vanish them, banish them, fear, blame, shame them out of existence, because that would only make them, even if I need to say them, stronger. So even as we speak right now, to name for the first time in this conversation something a little political, like we are in live negotiations between the East and the West, between US and Iran. And the only way for these negotiations to supersede war and more violence and bombs is for both sides to have to learn to set aside differences and understand where the other is coming from, to learn how to have conversation and dialogue, to learn how to find a way, even as difficult as it may be, where common ground may exist. Because the easy, lazy, predictable way is more bombs, more violence, more war, more arrest, more execution, more all of that. Okay, it hasn't worked for either side. Both sides need to learn rather than be proud or an ego or I won or have victory. See where we can come together in our humanity. So that's how I would explain it.
And I do agree with that in many different ways. I think a lot of time the way I think of wars and conflicts and arguments and all of that is basically each side have a story and they want to share their story in their own voice. Like that is what it boiled down to in my own mind, rather than someone telling you this is what your story should be or this is the right way of having your story. Let's just have people tell their story, and all we have to do is listen and not project our own story into the other and then be like, oh, since your story is different than mine, therefore it's not the right way to be. If I look at any war in our history, it is, to me, that it's the story that each person wants to share in their own voice, and someone else saying, no, you don't get to share it in your own voice. And you can apply that to everything that we see in our daily life. The issue between us, human, stems from that. It's like, no, your story is not the right story. And it's really sad when it is at the cost of life itself. And I think you and I talked briefly about this, is the idea that it doesn't matter who is trying to do this, as long as someone's trying to justify killing and taking someone else's life. That when I pause and no, let's argue this. If everyone stopped for a moment and thought, okay, there is no justification for killing anyone. There are people that I believe in evil in this world, and we see it in the genocide and the war and the bombing of school. But I think if we are going to treat the criminal and our remedy to that criminal is the same act of crime, then are we doing anything different? We don't think of that in any other way. We say kill the killer, but we don't think, oh, let's rape the rapist. Let's steal from the thief. It's just what are we ultimately trying to do as human? Are we trying to shift and grow and elevate ourselves to this ideals that we live by, or are we willing to step back to whatever that primal thing that is like, oh, this happened, let me go do it, so I have justification now?
Yeah, unless we're able to share the stories that you just mentioned, to be met, to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged simply as a human, another fellow being, without the label, without the identity projected, without the assumption, the expectation. There's a beautiful line that I try to remember. How can I meet you as you are or where you are if I'm expecting you to be where you're not? How can I meet you as you are if I'm expecting you to be where you're not? And so this is what reminds me how to be a better brother, a better son, a better therapist, whatever that means. How can I meet you? And if I'm not able to meet you, we're only, as you mentioned, by taking revenge, by harboring resentments, by banishing, shaming, blaming, othering, we're only reinforcing and repeating the cycles. And this is one frame of looking at it: the victim, the perpetrator, and the savior. The victim, the perpetrator, and the savior. Again, without sounding too intellectual or smart here, but it really does make sense, both at the individual level, how all three of those qualities may exist within me, and how I can also project this outward, which means that it has to exist collectively as well. And so if someone in the Iranian diaspora identifies as the rescuer, then they see the Iranian as the victim, the Iranian regime as the perpetrator, and so this cycle continues, where they, alongside the US and Israel and certain savior characters, become, those who are going to come and bring freedom and justice and humanity back to Iran. And we saw that it simply didn't work. It's not even an argument about whether you supported war or not. It doesn't matter, because now 3 months in, we realized that it didn't work.
We had no evidence it would.
Yeah.
Historically
there is no... too. But somehow we thought we were different, and it still didn't work. And so how do we break these cycles, which I would argue, and some people may or may not agree, that it comes back to the I, the individual, not in a selfish way, but unless I'm able to reconcile recognize, appreciate, acknowledge, hear, see, and heal those three parts inside of me, then I will continue to project it outward onto the enemy, onto the, and it's really hard. Don't get me wrong. And I don't mean to simplify, reduce anything, because as you mentioned, there are forces of evil. But ultimately, I haven't found any other way yet, because I cannot repeat what they are doing, because that just doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't think usually when I speak of this or any of it that I have the answers to any of it. I think I'm just pointing the fact that we've been doing this for centuries and there isn't anything that is changing. And the cost is, again, that life. So at what point do we go, well, these people like in power are drunk on their power from any side you look, and it's a continuation. And as long as we attach morality to certain people, we abandon ourselves in the process, and then we see the result of it and we don't like it, so we blame that person or this side or that side. So to me, merely speaking about it is me trying to name that, and this conversation is part of that path to maybe somewhere along the way we can meet ourselves in each other and kind of abandon this structure that convince us that war is just normal, casualty is okay, and that is just an outcome of all of that.
Yeah.
Thank you again for making this time and talking to me through this. I know there are going to be more and more to address and speak to. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. To be continued, hopefully in person, to collaborate together in, I'm sure, many ways, many creative ways, but also exchanging stories, in the days ahead. So thank you.